Good evening, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. Today, we will show our first session of how to use Taipy. So Taipy is a new productional grade data analytics, data visualization, web app framework in Python. So we will specifically look at today how to plot scatter plots of two different y-axes on two completely different scales. So we will see what we mean by that. So this is my working journals of Taipei so far. So this is our today's agenda, which is about plotting in Taipei, but we will also show other topics as well, such as how to use callback function in Taipei in UI display, and also other more advanced topics. So we will move on to see how specifically things work. So this is the reason why today's topic came up is because you can look at on the screen on this plot that there are two different y plots. So one is on the scale of from 0 to 100, which is y1 line. But the second line of Y2, it's actually much smaller scales, probably between 0 to 1. So therefore, because of the magnitude of Y1 lines, which is too much bigger than Y2, so therefore you can barely see the effects of Y2 lines on this plot. So therefore, it's difficult to read. And then we will show how we're going to solve this problem in Taipei. So for solving this problem, we can see the main ingredients in the solution is using Plotly Python framework in Taipei. So this really comes in handy for Taipei is because Plotly framework is a very well developed data visualization framework in Python. You can almost do anything with Plotly. So the capabilities of Taipei embedding this framework will enable Taipei to be extremely powerful in achieving all kinds of visualization. So I'm really happy to discover that we can actually basically just use Plotly in Taipei. So the steps for us to use Plotly in Taipei comes from you need to firstly import Plotly graph objects in your Taipei code. And then in order to plot these two different y-axes on different scales, so we recommend you to use make subplots function in the Plotly submodule subplots. And lastly, we should also import Taipei framework. And then after all these import steps, then we should also use add trace function in the subplots module of Plotly. So this is where we actually able to make these two different plots. So you can see, firstly, we should construct a Plotly figure object by calling the make subplots function. So here you can see that in the parameter of specs, we actually specify that we are making secondary y true. So this is where it will enable us to show two different y-axes and potentially on different scales. And then after we construct this plotly figure, then we will call the add trace function on this plotly figure. So this is the first add trace function. We will basically exhibit our first y-axis. So therefore you can see the secondary y, we make it to be false. So obviously you can immediately tell the next step when we're calling the add trace function on the plotly figure, we're gonna make the secondary y-axis parameter true. The reason why we construct a plotly figure first is because we will actually return this plotly figure into our Taipy code. So that is where we connect the plotly framework with our Taipy code. And then we will show exactly how that works in the next slides. So here you see that this plotly figure, right? So where we constructed, and then also we added two different y-axes on the plotly figure. So we used the Taipy framework that we imported, TGB, and then we call the char function of this Taipy framework, and then we pass in this plotly figure into this parameter. And then if you want to pay attention is that we actually surround this plotly figure with a quotation mark, right, as well as bracket. So this is just like a more simplified version of how these steps work together, because in reality, we will actually combine these first three steps of plotting the plotly figure into a separate function, right? So we're gonna make a plotting plotly function and make it return a plotly figure. So therefore, on this last step, we will just pass in that function that we defined to return this plotly figure here in this curly bracket around with these quotation marks. So this is where we will execute that plotly function here in this curly bracket, and where it returns the plotly figure and then pass into this Taipy parameter. So here you can see this is an example that I made, that I want to plot two lines in this Taipy dashboard, right? So the scatter plots, I want to plot the closing price of a stock ticker, right? And then the red line will be the difference of the closing price from the moving average. So therefore, you can see that the closing price is between the range from whatever, hundreds to 200s, right? So it's at the hundreds. But then the difference of the closing price from moving averages, it's between the scale of minus 0.04 to 0.02. So they will be basically under 1, right? So this is a really drastic difference of scales between these two lines. So therefore, if we are not going to adopt this solution of plotting two y-axes of different scales, you will barely see the effects of this second y-axis. So therefore, we will show how we manage to obtain this plot. So the first step, as usual, we should import Taipy and Plotly framework as we demonstrated on the last slide. So these are the specific code, right? So that we showed, you should import type.gui.builder, right? And also these two Plotly framework, right? Plotly graph objects as well as Plotly make subplots. The last one is we should also import the GUI framework as well as the page module. So this last import is mostly to run the entire Taipy dashboard, but after we finish constructing all our plotting functions. Then the second step, after we finish all these importing steps, is to define this separate plotting function in Plotly framework, right? That returns a Plotly figure object as we discussed on our last slide. So here is how it specifically is implemented. So this is the definition of this plotting function, right? So you can see that it returns a plotly figure object, right? So here is where we specify, and also it has a data parameter to plot on, right? So in the reality, when we are building our Taipy dashboard, so this data object would change, right? With the help of a callback function that responds to the user input variable changes, right? And so this topic will be a separate topic on another day. In the following tutorials that we will show how the callback functions work in Taipy that reacts to the user input variable changes. So firstly, we will create this plotly figure object with this secondary y-axis, right, using the make subplots function, and mentioning the specs will make the secondary y true. And then, as we've shown on our last few slides, that we're gonna add two traces. So what the first one for the first y-axis. So you can see here, our x variable will be plotting the date columns of this data object, right? Data frame object. And then our first y-axis is the closing price of this data frame. And then so you can see we will specify the mode to be markers, right? So that is to specify we are plotting this y-axis as a scatter plot, right? And then we are gonna call this y-axis closing price, right? So this is where you see showing the name on the left of the first y-axis, right? So therefore, we make this secondary underscore y parameter to be false because it's the first axis. And then we're gonna add the second trace, right? Interestingly, it's also a scatter function called on this plotly object, figure object. But instead, we're gonna plot this y-axis, the other column of this data frame object, which is the difference, right? The difference of the closing price from the moving averages. And then, but because we want this second y-axis to be shown as a line, so therefore this is where we specify the mode parameter to be lines instead of the first y-axis, which is the markers, right? And then we call this second y-axis to be the difference from moving averages, right? And then because this is the secondary y-axis, right? So therefore we make this parameter secondary underscore y to be true. And then you see this name that we specify for these two different y-axis, they're actually shown as the legend, right, on this plot, on this top right corner of this plot. And then after we finish adding these two traces, then so these are the more decoration of this plot. So if you wanna give titles for these two different y-axes, right? So you use the update underscore y-axis function on this plotly figure. So we give this first y-axis to be a name using the parameter title underscore text, right? So this is where it will show on this left part the name of this y-axis, right? And then the second one is we call this second y-axis showing on the right hand side of this y-axis, right? The secondary y-axis on the right hand side, we call it deviation from moving averages, right? And then so this is more like you see more like a markdown or HTML syntax, right, of naming this parameter of title text. So after we finish define this plotly function, then the next step is to think about how we can actually pass in, right, or call this plotly function in our Taipy code. So this is how we do it is we define a class object, right? This class called stock visualization, and then we make it a page class, right? A child class of this page module of Taipy, right? So in this constructor initialization function that we will just define all kinds of user input variables that the users can change, right? So this is where we do that. And then after that step, then we will call the super bracket underscore init to actually initialize, right? Construct this object. And then so this function is also an instance function, right? To call the plotly function in this Taipy visualization class. So you can see that we're gonna call it as a self instance function, right? And then we're gonna use the layout, right, of Taipy or whatever. So this is the part where we will call the plotly function. So how are we gonna call that is we are gonna use the Taipy chart function, right? And inside the figure parameter of this function, we will we will execute the plotly function that we just defined, right? With a double quotation, right? And then also a curly bracket around this code to call the plotly function. And after we do that, then the next step we're gonna do is so far we have finished writing all the plottings for this dashboard. So the next step is then we're gonna move to create the Taipy page to show these plots. So for doing that, we also add another instance function in that visualization object we just created, right? And then so we're gonna say with Taipy, that construct this page, right, part, and also the container part, and there that's where we call the instance function that we just constructed, right? This, which is actually a Taipy function, right? So voila, so here is how it's gonna show the plots inside this Taipy page. So so then the next we're gonna put all those steps together in a summary as entirety, how all those 4 steps actually work together, right? So this is the entire code of making this dashboard of plots work. So you can see that, at the very above, which are the 4 importing functions, right? And then the next step, this chunk is to define our helper function, which is to use the plotly framework to return a plotly figure that pretty much does the meat and potato of what we want to do, right? So which is making the subplots and adding the traces of 2 y-axis. One is our primary y-axis, which is a much bigger scale, and then adding our second y-axis, which is on a completely different scale. And then we're going to return the plotly figure last in our function of this plotly function. And then the next one, right, is we're gonna start to construct our Taipy dashboard, right? For doing that, we actually construct a visualization class which inherits the page class, right, of our Taipy framework. And then, of course, for any class, we're gonna have a constructor function first, right? And we're gonna have a instance function, which is a Taipy function, which is the chart function of Taipy function that calls the helper plotly function that we just defined. And then how we're gonna call the plotly function in the Taipy chart function is by quoting and quoting with double quotes as well as the curly brackets to surround this plotly function, this helper function, right? So this is where we call the external helper plotly function in our Taipy chart function. So then the next step is after we finish all the plot functions, then we will move on to creating the page for the Taipy dashboard, right? And then we're gonna return this page. And then so you can see the last part of this code is basically the main function for this Taipy dashboard is to to construct this visualization class and then pass in, because so basically the whole point of constructing this visualization class is to return a page, right? And now we're gonna pass this page that we constructed using this visualization class in this page parameter of the GUI, right? GUI object, GUI class, and then we're gonna run this GUI, right? So there we go, that we finished constructing our Taipy dashboard, plotting a function that has two different y-axes on different scale, right? So I'm gonna then show you how this works together in, and then the next we will just show you how we're gonna actually make everything work together, right, in this Taipy dashboard. So you can see this is the Taipy dashboard that I constructed, right, on this part, on this left part, which is showing a plot with two y-axes of completely different scales. And then we're gonna see that how this actually works, also incorporating user input variable selections, right? So here you see we are showing the plots of Apple stocks, and then we will show then how now a user, we select NVIDIA stocks, and then it's actually responding to that user selection, right, of NVIDIA and then Microsoft, right? So you can see this plot of two different y-axes works perfect, right? Responding to the user selection. So there we go. Hope that you like this video, and then feel free to tune in for the next videos when we move on to more and more topics of Taipei to make your dashboard work and shine. Thank you. See you next time.